I thank you very much for this invitation to what I have realized is a nest of religious activists, which is not a bad thing, just what it is. And it's something that's completely different from what I usually, the conferences that I usually attend. So it's quite an experience for me. Um, I have tried to adapt my talk to you guys. And I have done so by coming up with, I have the ambition today of giving to you a holistic account of human activity, which I believe is fairly non-controversial. It has no religious commitments and it has no transcendental commitments. It's just the story, a kind of beautiful story, in fact, about how the human brain works and maybe even how spirituality can be understood if we apply this particular lens. So let me start with this beautiful picture. You all probably know how it is to be on the beach, and even and as a kid, probably you've tried to make sand castles. But the reason why I show you this wonderful picture, which has been edited by AI, so it's sharp and crisp, is because it shows you what used to be just for a while a highly improbable structure, a sandcastle. And we know from science the, the principles, even in the universe, that improbable structures, they are bound to revert into more probable structures, like dust or pile of sand. No matter what we do, whenever we create structures that are improbable, they will revert to a more probable state. We move from order to chaos is a bit maybe a popular way of saying it. That's just the law in the universe. But we have things in the universe that behave a bit strange. We have life. Life and living systems, they seem to have the ability to fight entropy, this direction from order, chaos. Life, living systems, organisms, they don't want to turn into dust. They are programmed with the ability to maintain their highly improbable structure. They do so by collecting energy and maintaining their structure by adding energy. They're not breaking the law of entropy or anything because they're causing a lot of chaos around them. But they maintain their structure. And that is what defines life from this perspective. We share this as humans with all other living organisms. But humans are, of course, of interest today and at this conference. We have many activities, and they all seem to be about the same, to not become dust and fall back into more probable states. We collect energy. We go hunt. We go do this. We go do that. We have short-term things that we need to do. We need to eat. We need to sleep. We need to drink. We also need to plan ahead. We need to make sure the harvest goes well. Otherwise, we turn into dust later. So we cannot, so we will do whatever we can, and that is what defines our activity. Then we can chop it up into nice domains like social, individual, personal, spiritual, you name it, you can, it's all there. It needs to fit into this very small and simple account. We can change our environment if we need. If it's a cold environment, we will soon die if we don't change the environment into a habitat where we can maintain our viable states, our improbable structure. We can also, if it's not possible to change the environment, we can try to change ourselves. It's not always so easy, but we can do whatever we can. So we have efforts at different time scales. We need to do something short term. We need to do something long term. We need to plan. We need to adjust the world to our needs, and we need to adjust our needs to the world sometimes, and we are able to do all these things. Then, of course, it's interesting to see how spirituality fits into a simple story like that. And it does. Of course, it does. We have many, many different kinds of ways of being spiritual. We can try to, we can dance around a fire to get, or to make it rain. We have endless rituals around the world, ceremonies, prayer healing, shaman healing rituals. We have ideas about even, for example, even in the long term, it seems like many religious beliefs of this kinds that we've been talking about today. I'm not completely sure that I follow the general idea here about what spirituality is, because when I study spirituality, many of those things just don't fit with the noble virtues that we've been sketching today, but they're also there. But spirituality, if you think about something like afterlife, yes, obviously, it's a desire to maintain our structure. We don't want to turn into dust. It's beliefs, it's rituals, it's things that we try to change our environment also with our beliefs. We try to change ourselves with our beliefs. So it's all there, and it's holistic, and it's behind everything. It's even behind evolution. The law of entropy is there. Life has evolved the way it does to maintain their structures. Okay, so nice and beautiful big story, but also maybe not so useful for you guys because you want to deal with patients and clients who need spiritual care, right? And I really appreciate that. I understand also that there is being done a lot of interesting research. Very nice insights that I teach my students. I teach psychology of religion every year, and I often go through Pargeman's coping ideas. I refer to Koenig's Religion and Health book that we saw before. I use different handbooks, Crystal Park coping ideas in her research. Very nice. And they do talk about the same things that I've just sketched out. For example, Crystal Park, she talks about situational appraisal, how we enter into every situation. And if it doesn't go well, we need to look at how it fits with our global perspectives, our global belief systems, and try to find a kind of balance between what is happening to us and how we see ourselves at the very large time scale in the very far as our overall global beliefs. We can also see the same, this idea of adjusting to the world and adjusting ourselves, or adjusting ourselves to the world and adjusting the world to ourselves. We find it in endless models, right? We have it all over psychology of religion and general psychology. The idea that we're struggling to control, primary and secondary control, probably from Rothbaum, the classic paper from the 80s. But we have it in mastery meaning. We have so many dichotomies about this. Our human ability and to either change this environment or change our own need. I would say much of what I've heard today is very much focused around changing our own needs to a difficult situation, which makes a lot of sense when you have patients and clients, right? Because you cannot really do anything if you have an incurable disease. All you can do is to try to adjust your own beliefs, maybe. So often you would say that religion is mainly a kind of secondary control. I'm not so sure if you go out in the world. I think most of religion is about primary control. You want to be field, you want your fields to flourish, you want all sorts of things. So you do rituals to change those things. But when I look at the field, I am impressed with the attachment styles, with the personality traits, with all the different things that psychologists have come up to do or with in order to help and understand the role of spirituality, like what Niels Christian Witt has been talking about today, for example. We have endless constructs and scales and correlations, and the idea that we are holistic, if we can tie all of these traditions together, it makes a lot of sense for me. But there's a reason why I want to talk about entropy, because you might be able to integrate scale scores, constructs of different from different research traditions, give them this and give them that, look at socioeconomic factors and all these things, and always bring in the whole human. I understand, and it's something we should do, and it seems like you are doing a very good job, but I am still maintaining my story about entropy. And the reason is that it's not so far from what we know when we dive deep into physiology. Instead of taking a holistic approach, tying together what we know from these kinds of studies, we might actually start by looking at what we know about physiology. I'm not trying to disregard a spiritual aspect here. I'm just trying to see how far can we actually take it if we just consider how our physiology is organized. Can we look at the brain? And I really believe, at least for the last 20 years, entropy has turned out to be an extremely important concept. I'm really dry in my mouth. Do you have some water? Uh, I will take some of this. I hope it's not a sick person. What? I will give you some more. Good. Oh, fine. All right. So let's look at the human brain. The human brain is used to keep the organism within the viable states that it needs in order not to turn into dust, right? And it does so through perception and action. And we know a lot about how it does it. This is Fuster's very nice and illustrative model or just illustration of the brain. You know, we can look at all these short-term and long-term internal, external adjustments. We know how they work relatively well. We have regions, the primary modalities that are for a changing environment, immediate changing environment. We can see spot differences with our eyes, with our ears, with our bodies. We can interact with the world. And we also have areas that are related to long-term planning. The white areas that you see in Foster's model here are the association cortices. They're used for conceptual thinking, things that are more stable, that doesn't depend on a particular situation, but is relevant across situations. So we can start to plan ahead. Entropy is a threat to us as an organism, and it's a threat to the brain as well. If the brain fails to update its internal models about the world, it is in trouble. So we need to explain how the brain constantly updates its internal models in order to maintain its structure. And how does that work? And now I would like to present to you a relatively new way of understanding the brain. It's not mine. I have no activist agenda here. But I will tell you that it's a dominant model. It's becoming more and more dominant in not only the neurosciences, but also related disciplines like cognitive science, and even in the humanities. People are starting to want to understand if the brain is a predictive device, like I will talk about in just a moment. how on earth can we understand language? How can we understand music? How can we understand art? How can we understand religion? Predictive processing, as you can see here, is a relatively new phenomenon. If you use the Ngram viewer on the Google, it gives you a frequency of the mentioning of a particular concept, and in this case, predictive processing. And you can see something is going on around 2010-ish. Carl Friston, a mathematician and a neuroscientist, he formalized predictive processing into a model that can be applied formally to any kind of behavior and any kind of action, any kind of thought, any kind of cognition. It's a holistic model, at least according to Carl Friston. It explains thought and it explains behavior. And the idea in predictive processing is that in order to remain within viable states, the brain continuously predicts the causes of whatever is coming in through the senses, the sensory systems. So the brain is constantly making predictions. And if there is a mismatch between what the brain predicts and what the sensory signal communicates, there will be it will generate a prediction error. And every time we look, and every time we hear, and every time we think of something that doesn't fit our predicted model, we need to do something about it because it causes prediction error. The way we get rid of prediction errors according to predictive processing is by updating our predictive models. It's not rocket science. It's kind of what we would expect, right? So when we fail to predict what is going on and how things, what it is that we see, for example, we will update our model. And it's surprisingly powerful. And the reason why it's so powerful is because Carl Friston, he shows that it seems like the brain is using a kind of Bayesian updating. So we can actually formalize it. And in Bayesian updating, it is the precision or the strength of your prior beliefs, your predictions. In this case, I've put prior belief as our predictive model that we enter a situation with. And also the precision of the new incoming evidence through the sensory signal, the sensory systems. Those are the two that decides on the kind of the update that we will do. So if we have in this case, think about it as your weight, maybe, or my weight, for that matter. Yeah. So if I come into a situation and I believe honestly that my weight is around 83, I understand that there's some variation there. It could be 82 or 84 sometimes, but I'm fairly confident that I'm 83 and plus minus some kilos, right? Now, if I stand on a weight right here and it tells me that I'm 88, what is my experience? How do I create my predictive model of my own weight? Well, according to simple Bayesian updating, you will look at how precise is the incoming evidence and how precise is your prior beliefs. And I have to say that I have been weighing myself many times, and it's always the same. So I have a fairly high precision prior in this instance, and I don't know about that new weight. First of all, it's fictive. Who knows if it works? So I will not attribute it a lot of value. So my updated belief in this instance will be closer to my prior belief than the new evidence. That is not always the case, right? Sometimes, how do I think it went on to okay. Yeah. If we go into a situation with a very high precision on our belief, new information will not change our understanding and our experience, according to this simple way of looking at predictive processing. If We have weak priors, but the incoming evidence is very persuasive. We will have, we will, our update will be closer to the new incoming evidence, right? It makes a lot of sense. So depending on the precision of the prior and depending on the precision of the new incoming signal from our sensory system, we will update accordingly, sometimes closer to our beliefs, sometimes closer to what is coming in, depending on the strength of the two. That's basically, I have to say, it's a simplified version, and it will be a bit more elaborated on later in my talk. But let's look at experience. After all, we all seem to be interested in spiritual experience. For one, I am very interested in spiritual experience and how it works. How can we account for these experiences? And in this model, the experience of the human individual reflects the search for the model that causes the least prediction error. Constantly, we are looking for ways to understand the world that doesn't create prediction error. So look at this. It's for many of you who you might have seen this illusion or this thing before, but for most of you, you might just see white and dark dots, and you're searching and you're searching. In fact, right now, this image introduces entropy in your brain, a lot of noise that you don't like because you like to get rid of disorder. You want to create structure so you don't have to attend to this image more. How many of you can see what it is? If I tell you that it's a Dalmatian dog sniffing on the ground, how many of you up with the hands? Yeah, so half the rest of you, you're looking still to reduce your prediction errors. There's nothing but for those of you who have discovered that this is an ear, this is a paw down here, and this is the back, the boom boom of the dog. Once you can see it, you cannot go back because now you have explained it away. You have created order. That's how we this in this model. That's kind of how we are supposed to understand the world. We're constantly looking to explain away noise that we don't understand until we find a model that causes the least prediction error or settles on a satisfactory model we can live with. Now, typically in experience, in sensory perceptual experience, our sensory system provides us with reliable data. So sensory evidence has a tendency to be precise and therefore overrule our priors. If I came into this room with the expectation that it was empty, it's a good idea to update my prior based on what I see. Otherwise, I would hallucinate, right? And it would be a very strange talk for me to speak to an empty group. So you don't typically go into a situation and let your priors dominate contradictory evidence, right? So sensory evidence usually dominates, but it's not always the case. And that's what I have discovered I've studied spiritual experience for more than 20 years. And I've been reading a lot about testimonies, and I've been experimenting a lot with different kinds of experimental psychology and also within neuroscience using neuroscience imaging and these things. And it's not always the case that what is coming in through your eyes is what dominates your experience. And in particular, sometimes if the conditions include strong priors, that is very strong expectations to what you're going to see, but also if you are sensory deprived, if you can't see anything, or if you can't hear, darkness, for example. You're more likely to have a spiritual experience when it's dark. You don't typically, you are in hypnosis, which is a related field, I suppose. It's much easier to induce a hallucination-like experience in the darkness because you can't see if what is being suggested is there or not. That's a simple case. It could also be any kind of noise and ambiguity in the environment will allow your triers to dominate or at least have a higher weight in the balance, right? So if you go into a situation with a strong expectation, it's a good idea to turn down the light if you want that expectation to dominate your experience. It's not so easy to have an hallucination in a living daylight, but it can be done. But it's just, what I'm trying to say is, I forgot this. We need this as well. Look at this wonderful illusion. You understand. Of course, we're all familiar with the checkerboard and the effect of shadow, right? And so to pay attention to A and B, because now I reveal to you that that in fact A and B, even though they look like different colors, they are from the same color scheme. They are the same color. It's an illusion, and it's difficult to overwrite because we have very strong expectations to what a checkerboard is. So even when you see the color bars that shows, I don't know how this works. It's that field A and field B is not of or is actually the same color. When you go back, you say no, it's not the same color, because we know how a checkerboard is designed. So sometimes our expectations are so strong that even reliable input can't override our expectations. Oh, that's also, it's all fine, you know. This has been studied many times in perceptual psychology. The question, of course, is if this kind of balance between top-down beliefs and bottom-up input, this constant balance that determines what we see and what we hear, is that at all relevant when it comes to spiritual experiences? Is it a model we can use to understand religious experience? And I have been trying to do so for some time. The jury is out still, but we have a bunch of evidence, not evidence, we have a bunch of studies that seem to be at least compatible with this. For example, in this study, we show that expectancy effects and sensory reliability determines whether people detect agents in a virtual environment. It's just a virtual reality where people are asked to detect agents. And if we explain to them that there's a 95% chance that they will encounter an agent, they are much more likely to click on that button. They are also more likely to click on the button if they go around in a dark forest where you can't really see what's going on. So just examples. In this another study, we deprived the participants of their hearing and seeing and put them into a suggestive environment, putting on the famous God helmet. Some of you will have heard about the God helmet by Persinger, and we have used that design to create very powerful, intense spiritual experiences in the lab, just by telling them that Persinger invented a helmet that could induce experiences in 80% of the general population. That's what he claims. We know that it's probably not related to the magnet in the helmet, but it's related to suggestibility. People click on this no matter whether the magnet in the God helmet is active or not. Doesn't matter. I have also studied with imaging the effect of listening to charismatic authorities. There's something when people are receiving a prayer, for example, and they are told that the prayer is actually from a famous charismatic healer. We can see that they downregulate frontal cortex in quite massively, in fact, and systematically. Areas that you would expect that are typically used to, critically process whatever is coming into your mind, and it even correlates with the idea of a sensed presence. So when we ask them in this experiment whether they feel the presence, people who downregulate the frontal cortex the most are the ones who most intensely experience God, according to themselves at least. Research that I would love to do includes psychedelics, because there you also have ideas that maybe if you ingest psilocybin or LSD or some ayahuasca or whatever it is, your priors in the predictive brain, your top-down priors will be impaired, so you are more open to the bottom-up signals from the senses that are distorted. And in fact, people who are into this kind of research, they claim that ego dissolution and unity experiences that is categorized within a mystical framework often is exactly an effect of the top-down priors being impaired, losing the structure of the brain. That's why they talk about the entropic brain, that you can induce entropy into the brain, and that gives you some crazy ideas. It's a very interesting kind of research that I have not studied myself. But the fact, or not the fact, but the idea is that religious experiences and spiritual experiences can be viewed as a kind of Bayesian updating. I don't know if it's, we are still trying to figure out how good a model this is, but it's very fascinating to me that we have a language in predictive processing to describe what is going on when people report these experiences. If you come into the situation with strong beliefs, they will dominate, especially if the sensory input is weak, for example, in the dark. But you can also have strong sensory input, very convincing and persuasive. So even people with weak prior beliefs will have an experience of the religious kinds, if that's what it's about. We also can see another nice thing is the last thing here, where you see that many religious people who are taught by their parents and the priest that God exists, that they want to find a place where they can feel God. So they want support. So they go to churches, they go to meetings, they go to ceremonies in order to get rid of prediction error in a way in this model. The fact that you have a higher order belief that God exists, but you don't see God, causes prediction error. So you want to get rid of the prediction error. How can you align the bottom-up input with your top-down priors? By going to the church. In the church, there's an alignment between your prior beliefs and the evidence coming in through your system. I personally like this, but I'm also skeptical, of course, because this is a very simplified way of looking at spiritual experience. I know it's very intuitive, and I have to say it's very easy to model. It's very easy to conceptualize, and mostly it's very easy to describe phenomena through the language of predictive processing. But we need to expand it a bit in order to make it really interesting, probably for you guys, because you know that it's much more complex than what I just sketched. Religious experiences, are they really that simple? No, of course, they are not that simple. Experiences move in and out of timescales. This is part of the predictive processing framework. We just need to expand the predictive processing framework to include the hierarchy in the brain. And let me try to explain to you what I mean by this in and out of timescales. What? Prediction errors, when they are generated, no matter if it's out in the lower level of the hierarchy or it's at the more abstract higher level of the cognitive hierarchy, they reverberate through the entire predictive system until the brain finds a model across all levels that creates the least prediction error. So if you see something that creates a prediction error, you try to make it work at all levels. Experience is multi-layered. When I talk to one of you, or maybe someone that I know. I will listen to what you say. That's a kind of a sensory level. I'm just listening to what you say, how you move your hands, but I'm also trying to figure out who are you as a person. And if you're someone that I know, I would think about my past experience with you. All because I want to find the model that is the best model. So we are moving through a multi-layered a cognitive system when we see things and when we interact, and it takes time. It's a naive idea that spiritual experiences like a sensed presence of God, hearing God's voice, apparitions, visions, all these things that we find incredibly fascinating and mystical and interesting, that they happen like a basic perception. It's not how it typically goes around, right? Typically, it takes time to figure out what it is that what we've been exposed to. If something out of the ordinary is happening, it's not gonna be fixed in the situation. Typically, when you read testimonies, it tends to take time, unless you have very strong beliefs as priors, of course. But often when you read testimonies, people say that, after I experienced this, and have been thinking about it ever since, and only now, it was God, you know. So the idea that religious experience is something we can just isolate in a situation is not what I think is a likely model. It seems to be an extended process. And in fact, it puts a question to what experience is. I think this is where coping psychology and many of the models that you are aware of as psychologists, they come into play because these experiences are just symptoms of a constant process of reducing error according to this model. So I have sketched a figure. It might be a bit too complicated here, but if you imagine that this is a hierarchy of the brain, when we look with our eyes, the visual receptive fields, they just look for edges and lines changing all the time. New lines, new edges, depending on how I move, right? But the lines and the edges we integrate into more stable structures that are not constantly changing. So into objects, into faces maybe, into a complete modal integration of the vision that we then integrate with the other modalities, hearing things, other things. And those multimodal integrative predictive models, they are sometimes tied to a situation, but sometimes these models also count in other situations. So the models higher up in the cognitive hierarchy, they consist of models that are valid across situations. They can be used across situations, all the way to the highest level of spatial temporal integration, where you have very highly abstract models that don't have any detail, but they count in any situation. In fact, I'm not a theologian, but if I were a theologian, I would kind of like to, think about this, because God is supposed, right, to be behind everything. But if God is behind everything, he needs to be abstract and empty of content, because otherwise he wouldn't fit every situation. That's the whole thing with this hierarchy, that the higher up in the hierarchy, the more general and abstract the predictive models. It's only when you have those very dynamic and local predictive models that they're detailed. So that's the whole idea with hierarchical predictive processing, is that when you see 100 chairs, you take the essence of chairs to a higher level, and it doesn't really look like any of the chairs because it doesn't have the details, but it have few structures that represents all of the chairs, and etc. higher up in the hierarchy. And when we have those errors in the situation, they go through the entire system. Errors and updates. Not always. Sometimes we don't give a shit, sorry my language, if if it turns out that an object is not that object, but another object in the particular situation, it will not change your deepest priors of, the most stable priors that represent something across your entire lifespan, perhaps. But the more exposure you have, if something is reliable, it tends to become more and more abstract and more stable in your system. Okay. That idea that predictive processing is a hierarchical system makes it interesting to think with if you're interested in religion and spirituality. Because how on earth do religious beliefs, entire belief systems, how do they move around in a predictive system? If you reach to an idea that there are spirits present, and I've never thought about spirits before, I need to change something in my worldview. And so that prediction error needs to go up. And I need to say, okay, so if there are spirits, then I need to change my perspective on natural science. Then I need to change my perspective on this. Then I need to change my perspective on this. And if that's the case, then what I see with my eyes are probably different. And then what I hear is also different, So it's an endless moving around of prediction errors that new generated models cause in our brains. And it's very interesting what happens to a new believer once they start to have new ideas that somehow have consequences at all levels of the cognitive hierarchy. What on earth is going on? And I don't know. I have no idea. This is a theoretical country. It's conjecture, but we can speculate. And there are some very interesting questions that we need to answer. If predictive processing, hierarchical predictive processing, is the model of the brain that is becoming standard of how we understand the human brain, we really need to understand how religious ideas move through that system. So I have just listed a couple of questions here that I would like to work on and hopefully convince you as well to start looking at. For example, how far up in the predictive system do religious beliefs operate? Are they at the very top of the top-down chain in the hierarchical system? Are they somehow confined to lower levels? I have to say, I have a slide just in a minute where I argue that spiritual people and religious people, they don't seem to have this, or at least there's a big individual difference to how far up it seems their religious priors go. But we can have that discussion. And do religious beliefs always migrate toward higher integration? Or is it perfectly fine to have a spiritual prior at a situational level? For example, sometimes when I interview spiritual believers who loves astrology, tarot, shaman travels, shamanistic ceremonies, prayer meetings, everything, spiritists, seances, the Ouija board. We can go on like chi, acupuncture, all these things. So they can talk about these things. They say, yeah, I was at a spiritist ceremony the other day, and suddenly the light started to lit up or something. Or I heard a voice, and it was the spirit. And I say, was it the spirit? So yes, it was the spirit. But then they don't seem to take the consequence of the spirit prior. They don't put it to the very top of their cognitive hierarchy, because the day after, they don't care about spirits. Now they care about tarot, or now they care about something else. So it seems to me that some spiritual practices, some spiritual models, they don't travel. They are just meaningful. They provide meaning in the situation. But when you leave the situation, the priors, they don't migrate. With dogmatic believers, obviously, it's different. You have one prior, God maybe, and you will look at every situation and figure out how God is compatible. So you're moving your priors upwards. I will have a slide in a moment to illustrate this. When do religious beliefs backpropagate to lower levels? So when do our beliefs actually start to make us see God and feel God, sense presence of spirits, all these things? Of course, that's interesting. I think what we have been studying with the experiments, that there is something about the balancing between top-down and bottom-up precision in situations that allows for some experiences like that. My final question is, why do reported supernatural encounters lead to lasting changes in some individuals, while others seem unaffected? Again, it's a bit the same with the spiritual people. Some people, when they see God or hear God, they change their life. It has transformative power. But other people, they see or hear God and they don't give anything for it. They just find it very nice and very meaningful. And then they go to another situation and they don't care about it. It's just a good experience. So that is interesting. We need to explain why that is the case. So how far up in the hierarchy? I don't know, but I have been studying what happens when people pray, and I've been using fMRI to see what is actually going on. And why I'm curious about that today, because it's some years back, is because there are studies to suggest that indeed we can talk about a top-down in the brain. Where is the top-down? The top of the top. And if you follow McGiles and colleagues' research from 2016, they have looked at where in the brain is the most distant from our ears and our eyes. You know, what areas of the brain are farthest away of the lowest level of signals coming in from our eyes and our ears? And they say, you know, it seems like the default mode network that some of us know in this room, a network of activity in the brain, those areas are actually the areas that are farthest apart or distanced from our primary sensory modalities and motor modalities. So maybe this is by logic of physiology or anatomy. It seems like that might be where we have the most, the kind of cognition that is using the most stable predictive models. And it corresponds well with research on when the default mode network is active, because it's typically active when you move out away from the situation, right? It's when you think about the far future or the far past. It's when you do your offline thinking, mind wandering. It's also active when you think about other people's intentions, because maybe you have a history with them that makes you able to realize what is actually going on in the situation. But there's something about this that fits very well with predictive processing hierarchy. And that is why my own study from 2009, I'm increasingly skeptical about my own interpretation. Shit. When I did this study, I found activities when people did personal praying in the scanner, very nice regions going together, resembling the default mode network. But at that time, what I was occupied with was social cognition. And I read and I read and I read. And I saw that many brain studies actually show that the default mode network seems to be active, not only in offline cognition when you're not engaging with a task. The one task that is actually activating this system is when you think about others and the self. And so I was arguing in the paper, you know, when they think about God, maybe it's like because they mentalize about what God wants, you know, all these things. And now I think it might be a bit naive, because if it's just the top down of the top down, it's because they go offline and think about more stable predictive models. And maybe God has a role there because these were strong believers. So they might be occupied with a kind of a very stable, slow frequency cognition, in fact, instead of high frequency where you have lines and edges and sensory input. If you're interested in this, I have a panel on neuroscience together with 2 other colleagues, so we can have a critical talk about neuroscience. I only have 2 more slides, so bear with me. Do beliefs always migrate toward higher integration, like I promised you? I've been interested in this. I don't know, but it's a very good question, because in sociology, often you distinguish here in this forum. Spirituality is the personal side of religiosity somehow. Maybe not necessarily, but more or less. But in sociology of religion, spirituality is mainly a specific kind of religion where that is characterizing a modern way of being religious, where you have your own individualized, customized beliefs, and they change, and so you can call it modern spirituality, and you can maybe contrast it with a kind of dogmatic religiosity. The slogan can be, "I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious." And over here, it could be, "I'm religious, but I'm not necessarily spiritual," if you're just into dogma, for example. In the spiritual group, those people who enjoys going to, spiritual fairs and trying out all these new gadgets, they tend to join a meaning discourse where they like the meaning of their astrology, and they like the meaning of the ceremonies and the symbols and all these things, but they don't care a lot about truth. They very rarely talk about what is the objective truth. If you go to the dogmatic religiosity, it's about the truth discourse. And there's also something about the problems that they're trying to fix. But if you're into predictive processing, it makes sense if you think about those 2 styles of using religion. As in the spiritual version, you use priors that operate at the situational level. Today, I'm going to have a Hindu interpretation of a ritual. Tomorrow, I'm going to have a charismatic Christian experience. They don't need to migrate towards integration, because I'm not interested in truth. I'm interested in the experience. So you have a lot of interesting experiences that are local and dynamic, and the priors that allows them to have those experiences, they don't seem to be very high up in the at least the epistemic hierarchy. So as a slogan would be something like, "Here I have one prior for each situation, and it's very nice. And here I have one prior for any situation, because it's God," right? Whether it is a reflection of the predictive processing hierarchy, I have no idea, but I want to know. That's going to be my next years of research. This is my last slides, and it's a slide. It's a list of hopeful conclusions. So I believe that predictive processing offers scholars of religion and spirituality a model to explain how new experiences move through the mind. I don't know of other models that can do this. It's a very flexible tool, and it can be used for any inquiry. It also offers a vocabulary for describing religious beliefs, how they interact with changing environments. Again, it can be used by psychologists, neuroscientists, humanists, theologians, philosophers. It's a very simple language. The model is complex, yes, but it's like this. If I'm going to be very American in my slogan here, it takes a minute to learn, but a lifetime to master. It's incredibly powerful. Predictive processing is very intuitive. It's very difficult to get all the details straight, but it offers a vocabulary that we can all understand once we have it. And I also believe that it could offer a framework for integrating the models that we know of in psychology of religion and across other disciplines. When when coping psychologists talk about uh, global beliefs and how situational appraisal moves up and collides maybe if there's a crisis. If we talk about coping styles where you try to adjust yourself to a new change, or you try to change the environment to your own needs, all these things, they have a very easy and intuitive way of being integrated into this model. I will say this, that predictive processing is wrong. There's no doubt about that. It's a wrong model, but I really believe that it's the best shot we have right now. It's currently the best model because most fields, they seem to accept it. It has wide appeal. It's compatible, so it's difficult to not relate to. So I believe maybe we have here at least a holistic model of human activity that's not committed to any kind of transcendental power or a religious worldview. Yeah. And if nothing else, if you think that it's all bollocks, I hope that we can agree that it's a very beautiful story about life and entropy. Thank you.